Okay, this is going to be an interesting conversation today. We have Bobbie Anne Cox, who is the attorney for a group of people suing the governor and the Department of Health in New York. And I'm going to actually let you kind of explain the basics of it. What I know is that it has to do with the quarantine and isolation policies there during COVID. But why don't you give us the details of it? And I should tell people that if they want to keep up with what's going on and read a little bit more, they can go to unitingnys.com /lawsuit. But yeah, take it away, Bobbie Anne. Let us know what's going on.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me on, Allison. I appreciate it. So yes, I'm an attorney here in New York, and I've been practicing for about 25 years now. And the reason that I brought this lawsuit is because the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, and her Department of Health have promulgated a regulation, which, as you said, it's called isolation and quarantine procedures. And this regulation, they issued through the Department of Health here in New York State, and it's completely illegal. It's illegal on multiple levels. Number one, the Department of Health does not have the power to make a regulation like this. Technically, this is really a law, and only the legislature can make law. It's pretty clear. Our Constitution has separation of powers laid out very clearly in it. And what separation of powers means is that we have three branches of government. We've got the executive branch, which is the governor and the departments beneath her. And then you've got the legislative branch, which is our New York State senators and assemblymen. And then you've got the judicial branch, which is the judges and the courts. So what our Constitution says is that those three branches of government are all separate. They're not supposed to take the power from each other. They're supposed to each have their own separate power and authority. So what happened here was the executive branch, which is the governor and her Department of Health, went and took the power of the legislature. So they reached over into the other lane. They took that lawmaking power from the legislature and they made this law. They're calling it a regulation, but it's in actuality, it's a law. So that's the premise of our lawsuit is, look, you're out of control. You're not allowed to do this. You don't have the power, and you've actually usurped the power of the legislature because you can't make law, Governor, Department of Health. Only our New York State senators and assemblymen can make law. So that is really the basis of the suit.
And is that still true even when they call it a time of emergency or they invoke these sort of executive powers under a pandemic? I know that talking to attorneys in sort of the similar lane of case law, that one of the things that they constantly talk about is post-COVID focusing on what does it mean to have executive powers during a time of emergency? What does an emergency really constitute? So I'm curious, did that make any difference for them? Like, is that part of their reasoning?
Right. That's a great question. So with this specific regulation, they don't need there to be an emergency. So the regulation does not say in its language that there has to be an emergency for them to use this power. And I'll just explain for your viewers what that power is. So this regulation says that the Department of Health, the Commissioner of Health, who's the head of the Department of Health here in New York State, and anyone that she appoints can pick and choose which New Yorkers they will force to isolate or quarantine, which that could be they force you to stay in your home, or they can remove you from your home and they can take you and put you into a facility, a detention center, a camp, whatever you want to call it. So they get to pick where you go. They get to pick how long you stay there. And they don't even have to prove that you have a communicable disease. They just have to think maybe you were exposed to a communicable disease. And there's no age restriction. So they can take you, they could take your child, they could take your grandchild, they could take your elderly grandparent or parent. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of power they have given themselves in this regulation. And they can lock you up or they can lock you down for however long they want. There's no restriction on time frame either. So there's no due process here. The regulation says, within the bounds of due process. But there's nothing in the regulation that actually protects the citizen. It's 100% giving power to the Department of Health. And it is completely illegal. Number one, because it breaches separation of powers, but number two, because there's no due process in there. You can't make laws or rules that don't have protections built in to protect the citizens. So, for example, we see in this regulation that they say, okay, well, if you are if they do issue this order on you and you have to lock down in your house or you have to lock up in a facility somewhere that they get to pick, how do you get out? Right? That's a question that the judge on our case actually asked the Attorney General, because I'm up against the Attorney General for New York State in this lawsuit. That's who represents the governor and the Department of Health. And so the judge said, well, how does somebody get out of quarantine? Like, what's the process? And the response of the Attorney General's office was, well, they can hire a lawyer and they can file a lawsuit, which is an incredible, inappropriate answer to how does somebody get out of a forced isolation or quarantine situation. That's not the way our Constitution works. That's not the way our laws work.
Father's Day is quickly approaching, and your dad is thirsty. So go to AllisonWinePromo.com and get him some amazing Malbec from Argentina, which says, Dad, you were special enough for me to not just stop at a gas station to get you wine in a box. Plus, I had no money left over at the gas station anyway because I spent it all on gas. This says I'm supporting free speech and getting you unique wines that you just can't get at a grocery store. One of these comes from almost 9,000 feet. It's extreme altitude Malbec. Another comes from a farm where they handpick the grapes. The third uses natural fermentation. They all have a unique story, just like your dad. So go to AllisonWinePromo.com. Again, 50% off the wine itself and 50% off shipping. However, if dad prefers coffee or tea, then you can go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison and choose from a wide variety of high altitude USDA certified organic roasts from Nicaragua. There's a limited black edition right now, but there's also a Caturra tea. So if dad prefers tea, you can get the Caturra tea. It's tea made from the fruit that's around the coffee bean, and it brews a lot like a black tea. I like to cold brew mine. It's very good. Do it for 24 hours out on the porch, but you can hot brew it as well, just like any old normal tea that you get in a tea bag. It's very good. It's unique. It's a great way to support my work. So thanks for checking out my sponsors wherever you are, whatever you're drinking. Toast to free speech, and let's get on with the video. It's just the whole curious thing to me about it is that it seems like they've had to do very little to prove that what they're doing is legal in a lot of these cases, and it's up to the citizen to find the resources to fight back and expose it. It's just not something that a lot of people can afford to do. And so it feels like a lot of this stuff just slides past. And I'm just curious, for the average person, because like I said, I've had other attorneys on here, what do they do? I mean, do you have to get together with a group like yours? And do you feel like this has always been this way? Or do you think COVID sort of tipped the scale in the favor of the government sort of gaining even more, I don't know, judicial power, I guess, in that sense? Because like I said, we pay their bill. I mean, they could just run you out. They run out the clock with your tax dollars. Their attorneys are paid for by us. And then you got to also pay for your own attorney. It just seems like such a heavy burden for the average person to fight.
Absolutely. It is. You're right. So the answer to that question is, yeah, that's why this lawsuit is so important. We have to win this lawsuit, because what does it say to the government? We've seen a tremendous amount of overreach particularly by the executive branch of government since COVID, decided to grace us with its presence back in March of 2020, right? So we've got executive branches, not just in New York State. I'm talking about executive branches of government throughout the states in the United States and also at the federal level, right? We saw last year how Biden told OSHA. Now, OSHA is an agency and it's under the executive branch of the federal government. And we saw where Biden told OSHA to make a regulation, they called it a regulation, that required all companies in the United States that had 100 or more employees to require those employees to get the COVID-19 shot, or they had to mask and test weekly. And Biden got sued, OSHA got sued. It went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And in January of this year, the Supreme Court ruled on that case, and they said, no, you can't do that. The executive branch of government can't make laws. The executive branch of government is supposed to enforce the laws that are made by the legislative branch of government. And they ruled that regulation wasn't really a regulation. It was a law. It was disguised as a regulation, but really it was a law. And only Congress at the federal level can make laws. So they struck it down. The Supreme Court said, you can't do that. That's an overreach by the executive branch of government, and it's null and void.
So looking at the regulation here, it does say that if you're unable to afford legal counsel, that you will get one. It will be appointed for you. It also says, though, that they were going to work with local law enforcement to ensure the person complies. So this isn't just like a request. This is like, you will do this, apparently, and you could face, what, criminal charges? I don't know. But it doesn't necessarily say that in that item, but it says that they will coordinate with local law enforcement to make sure you comply.
Yes. So 2 points there. Number one, with regards to, them appointing you legal counsel if you can't afford it, it almost doesn't matter if they appoint you legal counsel, because how long does it take to bring a lawsuit? If you have someone that's locked down in their house or locked up in a facility because the Department of Health thinks they might or might not have a communicable disease. I mean, I filed this lawsuit the first week of April. We're already in the middle of June, and I still don't have a resolution yet. So you see how long it takes to go through a lawsuit. It's already been a few months. So you're going to have someone locked down in their house or locked up in a facility for a few months while a lawyer tries to fight the state to get them out. That is not due process. That is not how our Constitution is written. You're supposed to have due process built into your laws and your regulations so that you don't negatively affect and terribly hurt a citizen like that. So, that's really the first thing. The second thing is they did put in the regulation that they can coordinate. They say, we're going to coordinate with local law enforcement to ensure that you're listening to and following their orders. So that's completely illegal too. That provision conflicts with existing New York state law, the public health law, section 12 and section 12A already say what is supposed to happen if you violate a public health law or a rule. And it doesn't say that they can have the local sheriff come and knock on your door, right? So that's not a part of it. The other thing is this regulation conflicts with section 2120 of the public health law, which already has specific steps you have to take if you want to remove someone from society who's a health threat. So we already have law in New York State, which has been there for decades, that says if someone's a health threat, you have to go through all these steps before you can force them to quarantine. And the number one thing they have to do, according to that law, is they have to prove the person actually has a communicable disease. So this regulation conflicts with multiple provisions of existing New York state law, which goes back to what I said before. You can't have a regulation that conflicts with New York state law, because then the regulation is going to overpower the law, and then you lose separation of powers and you lose the equal. It's supposed to be all three branches are equal. So it's really key to understand that this is illegal on multiple levels. And this is why we need to strike this down.
I have a couple questions for you. If you're not watching this over on Locals, go sign up AllisonMorrow.locals.com and become part of my editorial board. We have meetings once a week live where you can give me feedback about my work and story ideas for weeks ahead. And I also pose or give people a chance to pose questions ahead of time for guests. So what do you think your chances are? And I think if I could just add to that, what do you think of the judicial system at this point in this era of COVID? Do you feel like, I think a lot of people have just flat out lost trust in the judicial system on many different political sides. I don't even think it's just like one side feels totally disenfranchised, like the judicial system doesn't work for the people anymore. It's just there to run interference for the government. But I guess, could you talk a little bit about, do you think you have, a high probability of winning this? And generally speaking, just what do you think about the judicial process and the judges right now in this era of COVID?
Right. Yeah. So I think our argument is very strong. I think that it's clear that the Department of Health and the governor have overstepped and that they need to be put back into their lane. The thing about this era of COVID, so we've seen a trend the past couple of years where courts don't really want to talk about the science, right? They don't want to make a decision. Do masks work? Does the COVID-19 shot work? Does, social distancing 6 feet apart work? Can you force people to get the shot to go to a school or to stay in a school or to go to work and to keep your job? They don't want to talk about the science because they're not scientists, right? There is now this, thanks to the mainstream media, there is now this very obvious and evident push about masking and vaxxing and social distancing and all this stuff. So it's very hard for judges to go against that grain. And I think that's why our case is so strong, because our case is not about science. We're not asking the judge, and I specifically say that in my papers. It's one of the very first thing I say is we're not asking the court to judge whether or not forcibly isolating or quarantining individuals who may or may not have a disease is an effective way to stop the spread of a disease. That is not our question. We're not at all asking the court to talk about the science, right? Does it work? We're asking the court to look at this regulation and then say, is this really a regulation, or is this actually an illegal law that was promulgated by the wrong department in our government, right? Mm-hmm. Did this come from the right branch of government? And that's what we're asking the judge to talk about and to decide. So I think that we have a pretty good shot at winning this. Of course, I'm expecting that if we do win, that the Attorney General's office is going to then do an appeal and go up to the next court, which would be the appellate division. And if we win there, I'm sure that they're going to appeal to the New York State Court of Appeals, which is our highest court in New York State. I think this is going to be a battle. I don't think they're going to give up the power that easily. But this is our intent, is that we're going to take this to the end and we're going to hopefully come out on top.
This video has been cut short to fly under the community guideline radar on YouTube. So if you want to see the entire conversation, go to one of my other platforms. The links are in the description. The best place to go is AllisonMorrow.locals.com, where you can support my work and become part of my editorial board. We have editorial board meetings there once a week where you can give me feedback from the week before. You can pitch story ideas for the week ahead. They're very small live chats, and so I definitely will see your comment and get your feedback. You also get exclusive content there, so definitely AllisonMorrow.locals.com. But whatever you do, don't stay here on YouTube. If you want the full truth about what's going on around us, you're going to have to go somewhere else.